the problems of the Midwestern farmers are going to eventually lead to a social movement, which eventually leads to a political movement trying to help their situation. This starts off with the Grange. It's also known as the animal husbandry of the Grange, patronage of the Grange, something like that. But we just call them the Grangers. And it starts off as a social program, an educational program, because of the isolation of the farm. You might not see your neighbors for days. So they'd throw parties and they'd get together. And as they formed these social events, what they realized was they were all dealing with the same problems. And the problems all centered around high prices, the problems with the railroads, problems with the banks. And they decided that they could cooperate. If the farmers, the individual farmers, formed a cooperative and pooled their resources, they could chip in together and they could buy grain at a cheaper price, right? They could get the railroads to make them, give them a lower transportation rate. So by forming a cooperative, they're pooling their resources, lowers prices, cuts out the middleman. Overall, it benefits. They also realized that they had political power when they were working together. And they're going to push for state level Granger laws to regulate the railroads. Now, these Granger laws are going to be state level laws, and they're going to be quickly thrown out of court because railroads cross state lines. It's going to lead to something called the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which largely is toothless, but they were trying to regulate the railroads. The Grangers were fine, but they realized that it wasn't enough. So the farmers eventually started forming these political alliances called farmers' alliances, where they could work to try to pass even more stringent regulation. There is some racism here. They refused black members. They said it's because the black members tended to be sharecroppers and tenant farmers and not landowners, but still, it doesn't really look good. And eventually those black farmers are going to lead to the creation of something called the Colored Farmers National Alliance. So they do eventually try to fight for their own rights here as well. Now, what the Farmers Alliances are going to call for is government ownership of the railroads. Those of you that are curious about what socialism is the nationalization or the government ownership of an industry. Well, we can see the farmers were calling for that here because they really did not like the railroads and the way that the capitalists were taking advantage and exploiting them. They also called for a progressive income tax. That's right. These people wanted an income tax. Now, here's the reason: because the farmers got taxed based on their amount of land, and there was no income tax, which means the rich people paid a property tax, but they weren't paying as much as the poor people comparative to their wealth. So they wanted a progressive income tax, which means that the rich get charged a higher rate than the poor. Right? The rich should pay more, is what they argued. They're going to call for antitrust laws, which means they want to break up the big monopolies, right? Against monopoly laws. They also want to promote inflation, which we talked about in the past. That's going to mean that the people that have borrowed money to buy these big pieces of land get to pay back money that is worth less than what they borrowed. Also, it increases crop prices, because remember, prices are a problem. This eventually is going to form these regional alliances, are going to conglomerate into a national party known as the Populist Party, or the People's Party, which is made up of these Midwestern farmers, and they're going to try to bring in the working class as well.